Welcome. You are listening to Aftersight. This recording is intended solely for individuals who are blind or have low vision.
Thank you for joining us for the Colorado Sun, September 10th, 2024, read by Tom McMillan. Today we will be reading the following main articles. Colorado's 5th wild horse helicopter roundup in 3 years, set to begin Wednesday, against the governor's wishes. EPA lets Colorado off the hook again in air pollution open records, environmentalists say. Coloradans miss out on millions in unclaimed tax benefits each year. A new law aims to change that. Colorado's 5th wild horse helicopter roundup in 3 years, set to begin Wednesday, against the governor's wishes. The BLM plans to remove 120 horses from Little Book Cliffs near Palisade, adding to the more than 2,100 Mustangs captured in Colorado since 2021. By Jennifer Brown. Federal land managers are set to begin Colorado's 5th wild horse helicopter roundup in about 3 years Wednesday, part of a major effort to remove tens of thousands of Mustangs from public lands across the West. The operation at Little Book Cliffs near Palisade is expected to last about a week and result in the removal of 120 wild horses, adding to the 2,100 animals that the U.S. Bureau of Land Management has hauled off Colorado rangeland since 2021. Each of the helicopter roundups, in which a contracted pilot and wranglers on horseback herd Mustangs into temporary corrals, has riled wild horse advocacy groups and stretched tensions even further between the federal government and Colorado leaders. American Wild Horse Conservation said Monday that the federal agency's decision, quote, rejects published science and persistent calls from the governor and state lawmakers to reevaluate and delay the roundup in favor of in-the-wild conservation, close quote. Governor Jared Polis and state lawmakers who created the Colorado Wild Horse Working Group last year had asked for a delay of the roundup pending, quote, further analysis, and that the BLM at least use a slow-paced, quote, bait and trap approach rather than chasing them with a low-flying helicopter. Federal land managers responded in letters to the governor and state lawmakers that they would meet some of their demands, including allowing the state veterinarian to attend the roundup, to stop operations if there is excessive heat, and to avoid roping the horses, quote, unless necessary. However, BLM State Director Doug Vilsack rejected the governor's requests to use fertility control instead of a roundup, and, if the federal agency held a roundup, not to use a helicopter. After the agency gets the wild horse population under control, its plan is to, quote, reduce the need for these larger-scale efforts, close quote, and control herd sizes through bait and trap operations and fertility darts, Vilsack wrote in a letter to the governor, which was released to the Colorado Sun. The federal agency, quote, is committed to the humane treatment of animals at each stage in this process, Vilsack wrote. Quote, the removal of some horses from the range this fall is a critical step in ensuring the success of fertility treatment programs. Science shows that wild horse populations can grow rapidly, reducing the effectiveness of fertility treatments in overpopulated areas, close quote. Hundreds commented on the plan to remove 120 horses. The plan is to spend about a week in the rugged plateaus east of Grand Junction, capturing 140 horses. About 20 mares will receive birth control vaccines. Of the 140 horses captured, wranglers will release 20 back into the range, giving consideration to genetic diversity and male-to-female ratio. The BLM said it would consult with Friends of the Mustangs, a volunteer group that makes sure the horses have enough water in times of drought, as it determines which horses to haul off the range and send to holding pens. The goal is to have a herd population that grows only 2% to 5% per year, stabilized between 90 and 115 horses, the BLM said. Horses that are 20 years old or older and not physically fit enough to survive the roundup would remain on the range. More than 420 people, many of them advocacy groups and individuals who love wild horses, submitted public comment on the BLM's plan during a 30-day public comment period this spring. The public is allowed to view the helicopter drive from a distance. Little Book Cliffs, one of 4 herd management areas in the state, is 36,000 acres of bunchgrass and sagebrush with limited water. Federal officials have determined it can support a maximum of 90 to 150 horses, though it now has an estimated 215. The roundup at Little Book Cliffs is one of 13 operations in California, Wyoming, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado to remove 17,330 Mustangs and burros from July through September. All of the operations involve helicopters, except for an ongoing bait and trap effort to capture 45 animals from Sand Wash Basin in far northern Colorado near the Wyoming border. The federal agency removed more than 600 horses from Sand Wash with a helicopter 3 years ago. Other recent helicopter roundups resulted in the removal of about 570 horses on West Douglas rangeland in 21 and 23, and about 820 horses from Pisiance East Douglas in 22. The West Douglas area is unsuitable for wild horses because of lack of food and water, according to the BLM, which removed horses there after a wildfire in 2022 that destroyed much of the forage. On the Pisiance East Douglas, wild horses have been moved onto adjacent private property in search of food and water, BLM spokesperson Stephen Hall said. And in Sand Wash, wild horses were devastating wildlife habitat, particularly for the greater sage grouse, he said. Greater sage grouse numbers have rebounded since the 2021 wild horse roundup, which also helped big game herds who share grasses with the Mustangs, Hall said. The BLM seems geared toward holding another helicopter roundup in the near future at Pisiance East Douglas, which has more than 600 horses. The appropriate number for that land is 130 to 230 animals, according to the agency. Quote, fertility-controlled darting efforts alone will not result in a sustainable population, and rangelands and wildlife will continue to be impacted if herd size is not reduced, close quote, Vilsack said in his letter to Polis. Large sums are spent on the issue of wild horses. Polis and state lawmakers, frustrated after previous attempts to stop helicopter roundups, created the 23-member Colorado Wild Horse Working Group through Senate Bill 275. The group was given $1.5 million in state funds and a mandate to recommend, quote, humane, non-lethal alternatives, close quote, for wild horse population control, including birth control. The funds are helping pay for an expansion this spring of a U.S. Department of Agriculture program to shoot mares with fertility darts, including at Little Book Cliffs. I am confident that we can succeed together in implementing the most robust fertility control darting program in the nation, Vilsack said. Among the state group's other goals is to establish a permanent sanctuary for wild horses removed from Colorado's rangeland. The BLM's Vilsack said he was confident that the state working group, quote, will soon make recommendations to address this issue in the future, close quote. As for the Mustangs removed from Little Book Cliffs, they will go to temporary holding pens on state prison grounds in Canyon City, and then up for adoption during a June event in Grand Junction, the agency said. Colorado, which has 4 Mustang herd management areas on about 400,000 acres, should have no more than 827 animals, the BLM says. The current count is more than 1,300. The federal agency says that 0.4% of wild horses die during roundups because of acute causes, and that the mortality rate is slightly higher for bait and trap operations than it is for helicopter drive and trap operations. Wild horse advocacy groups question why the federal agency wants to add more horses to its holding pens, which now have 63,000 Mustangs nationwide. The facilities cost taxpayers $108 million last year, according to American Wild Horse Conservation's testimony against the BLM roundup. Quote, the BLM is setting aside a genuine opportunity to act on 2 years of bipartisan progress made in Colorado to manage wild horses differently and to stimulate an improved and more cost-effective national model, close quote. Spokesperson Scott Wilson said via email this week, quote, Little Book Cliff's wild horses do not share their range with livestock, so there's no immediate need to remove the wild horses and take numbers to an unreasonably low level. EPA lets Colorado off the hook again in air pollution open records, environmentalists say. After initial objections, federal officials now say Coloradans' data access is good enough. By Michael Booth. The Environmental Protection Agency is letting Colorado air pollution officials off the hook for making records available to members of the public who might want to help police corporate rule breaking, 2 state environmental groups say. The federal agency had previously held up approval of a key state implementation plan detailing how Colorado will stop northern Front Range violations of EPA ozone caps. The EPA, in delaying approval, had agreed with environmental groups that Colorado should more frequently demand records from polluters and make them easily accessible. But Colorado pushed back hard, arguing that its proposed system provided effective and reasonable access to anyone who wanted it, and that the EPA's initial demands went above and beyond what the agency was requiring of other states. Attorney General Phil Weiser's office sued the EPA in the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, as required by the Clean Air Act, to stop the demands for expanded open records. Now it's likely the environmental groups will have to file their own lawsuit with the 10th Circuit, demanding the EPA's tougher open access rule be put back in place. Coloradans wanting to check up on actual air pollution emissions from oil and gas or other sites will be, quote, getting just the tip of the iceberg, close quote, said Ryan Mayer of the Center for Biological Diversity, which, along with Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, has been challenging Colorado's open record rules. Quote, and the EPA and Colorado are saying, well, that's all the public needs, close quote. Adding insult to Coloradans, Mayer said, is that the EPA reversed its position on the open records rules without consulting any public groups or individuals. The gap of information available to the public comes frequently in flaring operations at oil and gas production sites, with rules requiring that the producer have burning devices that remove 95% of methane and volatile organic compound emissions created as an extraction byproduct, Mayer said. The oil and gas company may only need to report once a year that it has the minimum required equipment in place, Mayer said. But those reports don't often say how the flaring equipment is offline due to malfunction or maintenance, or whether it's truly burning up 95% of a pollution. Unless state inspectors demand those records and put it online in a way the public can access, enforcement lags, Mayer said. Quote, there's 14,000 permitted entities out there, and the state is not requesting records on a regular basis, close quote, Mayer said. Quote, we know that we're not going to get access to a lot of this unless it's required by the EPA, he said. That's why this situation is especially disheartening, where the EPA initially came out with such strong language in favor of public enforcement, and then just kind of accepted what I view as pretense, superficial explanations, close quote. The Denver regional office of the EPA said Monday it was still evaluating comments on its proposal to accept new state implementation plan details from Colorado, and would respond to groups like Center for Biological Diversity before taking final action. The EPA said that after it had initially rejected parts of Colorado's state implementation plan for lack of records access, the state, quote, submitted a letter committing to undertake additional steps to improve public access to regulatory compliance information and clarify existing SIP reporting requirements, close quote. Colorado air pollution control officials said they would not have any comment about the open records dispute. Coloradans miss out on millions in unclaimed tax benefits each year. A new law aims to change that. The state's Department of Revenue will help up to 100,000 Coloradans file their taxes to get refund checks and access to tax credits. By Tatiana Flowers. Each year, Coloradans lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars in unclaimed federal tax benefits meant to stem poverty and help families make ends meet. Now, a new state law aims to put more of that unclaimed money into people's pockets by directing the Colorado Department of Revenue to persuade more residents to file their tax returns. The goal of the pilot program, which the law says must launch by August 15, 2025, is to help thousands of Colorado households receive funds they're owed but that they don't know they're eligible for. Quote, I think it's so clear that poverty is a policy choice, and it's a tragedy that in the wealthiest nation in the world we still have folks that struggle to make ends meet, close quote, said State Rep. Manny Rutinel, a Commerce City Democrat and sponsor of House Bill 1288, which passed this year and created the pilot program. Quote, hopefully, this takes us in a better direction, close quote. House Bill 1288 requires the Colorado Department of Revenue to help up to 100,000 Colorado households file or amend a federal or state income tax return, or both, and claim the federal or state earned income tax credit, or the federal or state child tax credit, or even all four of those, for up to 2 previous tax years. The move will help Coloradans who participate access some of the largest tax credit programs available. Program participants, especially those with children and very low incomes, could receive more than $10,000 through the program in some cases, the largest lump sum of money many Coloradans receive all year. The Colorado Department of Revenue must also select and work with a, quote, third-party entity, quote, that will help it identify eligible Colorado households and persuade them to opt into the program. The third-party agency would then pre-populate federal and state tax forms for each participant using wage data and other information already kept by the Department of Revenue, and then submit the forms to the Department of Revenue or the Internal Revenue Service. The pilot initiative will launch while Colorado has increasingly lagged behind most other U.S. states for its number of residents who are eligible to receive the federal earned income tax credit but don't participate in the program. A problem always, but especially amidst the housing and affordability crisis, said several people interviewed for this story. Legislators and other advocates who helped create House Bill 1288 said the intention of the law is to help lift Coloradans out of poverty and help them see that they can receive sizable refund checks from filing their taxes and by applying to receive money from tax credit programs. The funds are so substantial that many families with low incomes plan their year around their refund checks to help themselves pay for food, rent, health care, child care, car payments, utilities, and other important expenses. As a result, tax credits can help improve health, generational wealth, and educational attainment for adults who receive them and their children. Tax credits also have a, quote, multiplier effect. Each dollar a family receives from an earned income tax credit can equal up to $2 in economic activity where they live, which can help stimulate local economies, said Kathy White, Executive Director of the Colorado Fiscal Institute. Coloradans who receive notices in the mail informing them about the pilot initiative will be curious about the program, Rutinel said. Quote, so it's important to boost awareness about this issue to increase the effectiveness of the program. Close quote. Quote, this is personal for me, he said. For a lot of folks, tax season isn't the happiest time of year, but growing up, I saw firsthand what the power was when my single mom was able to access these important entitlements and how much that helped us stay afloat. State leaders appropriated $167,585 from the general fund to the Department of Revenue for fiscal year 2024-25 to implement the requirements of House Bill 1288, which passed May 14th. The law does not specify how the Colorado Department of Revenue should prioritize the Colorado households that participate. The department should focus on prioritizing Colorado households that have at least one child and earn less than $50,000 per year, said one leader at a Colorado organization working to reduce poverty, who spoke on background. Lifting people out of poverty. There are many reasons why people don't file their taxes. People might think they would owe the government money after submitting their income tax return, or they may be distrustful of or intimidated by the Internal Revenue Service or other powerful government agencies that collect money and enforce laws. Others may be confused by or unfamiliar with the tax filing process, including immigrants and people who are not required to submit a tax return because their income is below the filing threshold. Some workers who have multiple jobs may feel it's too burdensome to collect all of the wage data needed to fill out tax documents, while others may not know they could work with a tax preparer to help them. Many people who are eligible for tax credits, likewise, don't apply to receive them because they may be unaware the programs exist, or the credit's complexity may make them reluctant. This year, the maximum amount a person with no children can receive is $632 through the Federal Earned Income Tax Credit program. A person with one child can receive up to $4,213 through the program. An adult with 2 kids can get up to $6,960, and a person with 3 kids can get up to $7,830. This year, Coloradans who receive money from the Federal Earned Income Tax Credit will qualify for a state earned income credit equal to half of their federal credit. The federal child tax credit generally gives a parent up to $2,000 for each of their qualifying children. The maximum amount of money a person could earn through the state child tax credit program is $1,200 per qualifying child if the recipient makes less than $25,000 per year. That number drops to $600 if the recipient makes $25,000 to $50,000, and decreases to $200 if the recipient makes between $50,000 and $75,000. The new Family Affordability Tax Credit, passed by the state legislature this year, intends to supplement the state and federal child tax credits, and will do even more to help families with children meet the high costs of living across the state, White wrote in an email to the Colorado Sun. The Federal Earned Income Tax Credit and Federal Child Tax Credit lifted 10.6 million people above the supplemental poverty measure, and made poverty less severe for 17.5 million others in 2018, according to the Federal Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Quote, "The Earned Income Tax Credit is one of the federal government's largest refunds, and it's the second largest anti-poverty tool we have in this country, aside from Social Security, in terms of how many people it lifts out of poverty per year," close quote, said Kristen Hubbard, Director of Tax Help Colorado at Mile High United Way, the largest free tax filing program in the state, where volunteers filed more than 9,700 tax returns this year from January through April, which helped Coloradans receive $19 million in refunds. Tax breaks are important for many reasons, and yet the Internal Revenue Service estimated about 5 million potentially eligible American taxpayers do not claim the federal Earned Income Tax Credit each year, meaning more than $7 billion in benefits are unclaimed annually, according to a report by the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. The Internal Revenue Service has also estimated that 1.7 million people who were eligible for that credit but did not receive it had filed their taxes, while the other 3.3 million people did not file a federal tax return, according to the report. Colorado lost out on $785 million in federal earned income tax credits and federal child tax credits that went unclaimed in 2021, according to a Colorado Fiscal Institute analysis of most recent tax return data. The Economic Security Project estimates that 750,000 to 2.6 million households are missing out on the federal child tax credit, which suggests that 15,000 to 52,000 Colorado households may not be receiving that credit. If just 10% more eligible Colorado families received the federal Earned Income Tax Credit, the move would bring almost $80 million into the state, according to the Colorado Fiscal Institute's analysis. Money that's unclaimed from tax refunds and tax credit programs sits in state and federal government general fund budgets and is used, as all other income taxes are used, for things like education, health care, infrastructure, and social programs, White said. Quote, "This means families and communities leave hundreds of millions of dollars on the table," close quote, White said. People who are eligible for a tax break from the federal Earned Income Tax Credit but don't participate are more likely to be those who are recently divorced, self-employed or unemployed, living in rural areas, non-native English speakers, grandparents raising grandchildren, those experiencing changes to their financial or parental status, and families that have at least one person with a disability included in them, according to Internal Revenue Service researchers. The state should increase funding for expanding current programs that offer free tax filing support to low and middle-income families in Colorado, Caroline Nutter, a legislative coordinator at the Colorado Fiscal Institute, wrote in an email to the Colorado Sun. A campaign to encourage people to file their taxes. Derek Kuhn, a spokesperson for the Colorado Department of Revenue, said the state is aware that some people avoid filing taxes for many reasons, but the department has resources to help, he said. Quote, "We understand that filing taxes can feel scary in many cases, such as when an individual does not have a Social Security number or is nervous about owing taxes," Kuhn wrote. Non-filers without a Social Security number can file if they obtain an individual taxpayer identification number, he wrote. Colorado offers many resources, including our volunteer income tax assistance sites located across the state, and the department's Revenue Online free filing tool for state returns, close quote. The Department of Revenue wants to make filing Colorado taxes easier and is compiling a complete list of Colorado tax credits and subtractions, he wrote. Captured wolf dies. Pack relocated after feeding on livestock in northern Colorado. CPW broke its silence after announcing 2 weeks ago that it would capture the Copper Creek Pack in a blow to the state's reintroduction plan. By Tracy Ross and Jennifer Brown. State wildlife managers captured a wolf pack that was killing livestock in northern Colorado and relocated the 2 adults and 4 pups to, quote, a secure enclosure with limited human interaction, close quote, state officials announced Monday afternoon. The male adult wolf died 4 days after it was captured, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife officials said the wolf had deep puncture wounds on its hind leg, which they said was unrelated to its capture. The wolf's body weight was almost 30% lower than when it was released in December, when it weighed 104 pounds, CPW said, and it died despite receiving antibiotics for an infection. Wildlife officials said it was, quote, unlikely the wolf would have survived for very long in the wild, close quote, and that they would conduct a third-party necropsy, with results expected in 45 to 60 days. CPW Director Jeff Davis said had the male survived, it would have been in captivity permanently because of its predation history. Biologists are still assessing whether the captured female can be released, CPW Deputy Director Reed DeWalt said. Colorado Parks and Wildlife said the operation used foothold traps and required 5 capture and relocations of wolves. Only 2 pups were captured at the same time. They are all members of the Copper Creek Pack, which was feeding on cattle and sheep primarily on a single rancher's land for months in Grand County near Kremling. The wolves are being held in a temporary enclosure and being fed carnivore logs, carcasses from roadkill, or other ungulates. After examining the wolves, the agency said the 4 pups, which are still primarily dependent on adults for food, quote, are not effective hunters of anything larger than a rabbit or squirrel, close quote, and that there's no evidence that they were involved in any of the livestock depredation incidents in Grand County. Wildlife officials said they plan to spend time assessing the health of the female and her 4 pups, and at some point, quote, release them into the wild together so they can contribute to wolf restoration in Colorado, close quote. Biologists won't release them until they're large enough to wear adult-sized tracking collars, likely sometime in December or January, they said. That could happen with the next round of wolves brought to Colorado from another state. DeWalt said the agency is looking for new territory, thick with ungulates and, quote, not too close to livestock, close quote. The 2 adult wolves in the pack were brought to Colorado from Oregon just 10 months ago, part of a voter-passed wolf reintroduction plan that is now under even more scrutiny after a second relocation. The female and male wolves, which were the first of the introduced wolves known to have pups, were among 10 released in western Colorado in December. CPW began capturing the wolves August 22 and withheld details about the operation until Monday. The decision to remove them came after the agency denied a request by rancher Conway Farrell to take lethal action to protect his livestock. Wildlife officials said they could not remove only the male wolf, which they believed was responsible for killing cattle and sheep, because it would affect the survival of the entire pack. The agency's wolf restoration plan says that it will not relocate wolves with a history of killing livestock, quote, into the wild within Colorado, close quote. Quote, the plan also calls for flexibility, CPW Director Jeff Davis said in a news release, and it may not at times account for every unique situation the agency and our experts encounter, close quote. The agency consulted wildlife biologists, veterinarians, federal partners, and ranchers to create, quote, a plan to deal with this unique situation that's in the best interest of the wolves and Grand County producers, close quote, he said. The female wolf was the first captured first and was in good body condition, CPW said. Wildlife biologists then captured the male wolf, followed by the 4 pups. The pups were all captured from Friday through Sunday and are underweight but healthy, the agency said. But Delaney Rudy, Colorado director of Western Watersheds Project, said the group is, quote, devastated by the news of the dead father wolf and must be sure that in the future Colorado's wolves are not set up for conflict and therefore removal. Tools for non-lethal coexistence have been provided cost-free to ranchers along the way, and wolves should not have to pay the price for producers' refusal to implement them, close quote. In April, the Middle Park Stock Growers Association sent the first of 3 letters to CPW asking for help protecting their livestock from the adults in what would become the Copper Creek Pack, which were denning on federal land near Farrell's ranch. But Tim Richard, president of the Middle Park Stock Growers Association, said CPW officials told him they wouldn't kill the male, quote, because they were afraid of den failure, close quote. In an April 24 letter, Farrell requested a permit that gives the permit holder authority to kill wolves if they are chronically killing livestock, and hazing has not worked. In its response, CPW said Farrell's situation didn't meet the criteria needed for the permit, and that he could have avoided some of the livestock losses if he had accepted help sooner from the Colorado Department of Agriculture and employed more non-lethal mitigation techniques. The state's wolf reintroduction plan says relocating wolves that are killing livestock, quote, has little technical merit, close quote. It's unclear exactly when Colorado Parks and Wildlife decided to remove the problem wolves and who made the call. 3 of the 4 pups that are part of the Copper Creek Pack were captured on video in August playing in a rain puddle as an adult wolf watched nearby. Davis said the agency is looking at the same general area the pups were removed from, quote, the northern release oval, close quote, to release them back into when they are ready. Scientists who have studied wolf translocations after livestock conflicts say it rarely goes well for young wolves that rely on their parents to hunt. A University of Montana study found that more relocated wolves died, and survivors often killed livestock in their new locations. Of the 88 translocated wolves in the 2005 study, 58 died after the trapping and moving, which is a lower survival rate than wolves that were native to Montana. Colorado voters narrowly passed the wolf reintroduction plan, called Proposition 114, in November 2020. The ballot measure, passed mainly by urban voters, directed state wildlife officials to begin reintroducing gray wolves by the end of 2023. The first 5 wolves were released December 18th north of Interstate 70 on state land in Grand County. Another 5 were released December 23 in Grand and Summit counties, also north of I-70. The state's nearly 300-page reintroduction plan calls for the release of 30 to 50 wolves in total over 3 to 5 years. Colorado Parks and Wildlife said it aims to capture 10 to 15 wild wolves per year through trapping, darting, or net gunning in the fall or winter, releasing them in Colorado from December through March. Davis said, continuing with the wolf restoration plan is important because, although it may sound counterintuitive, quote, having more animals on the landscape allows greater management flexibility moving forward, and as we get packs established, that's a lot easier to manage than individuals roaming around on the landscape because those animal packs will protect territories, close quote. Richards said the Stock Growers Association, quote, strongly encourages CPW not to release the pups back into the wild. Quote, Mom's a proven killer. We believe the pups have been part of sheep killing and possibly calf killing. All they'd be doing is kicking the can down the road, and we're going to be removing these wolves eventually. Keeping them in captivity would probably be the best idea right now, close quote. The male wolf from the Copper Creek pack is the second to die of Colorado's 10 introduced wolves. A male gray wolf found dead in Larimer County in April had puncture wounds in its skull that suggest it was killed by a mountain lion. Police arrest man accused of speeding on Trail Ridge Road in Rocky Mountain National Park, injuring 3. Wade Thifault, 23, allegedly hit a car as he barreled past Beaver Meadows Visitor Center Sunday afternoon, the national park said. By Olivia Prenzel. Police have arrested a 23-year-old man who they say hit another car, injuring 3 people, as he sped along the winding, high mountain roads through Rocky Mountain National Park. Wade Thifault from Hudson was taken into custody in the High Drive area outside of the national park, spokesperson Kyle Patterson said Monday morning. Authorities began looking for Thifault on Sunday afternoon after he entered through the Grand Lake entrance on the west side of the national park and started to speed past cars along US 34 over the 48-mile stretch of mountain highway through the park, according to a news release from the park. When park law enforcement rangers tried to pull him over, Thifault kept driving, the park said, and because of his speed and reckless driving, the rangers stopped chasing him. Thifault sped past the Beaver Meadows Visitor Center, where he hit another car with 3 people inside, the park said. All 3 occupants were brought to the hospital, one with critical injuries. Thifault then got out of his car, sans shirt or shoes, and ran toward homes along High Drive in Estes Park, the park said. Rangers and officers with the Estes Park Police Department and Larimer County Sheriff's Office told residents to shelter in place. Authorities believe Thifault is also wanted in a felony burglary case out of Grand County that remains under investigation. Quote, I'm living a lie, close quote. On the streets of a Colorado city, pregnant migrants struggle to survive. Over the past 2 years, an unprecedented number of Venezuelans have traveled to the U.S. border seeking a better life. They've found themselves in American communities roiling with conflict about how much to help newcomers or whether to help at all. From the Associated Press. Bianca Vasquez Tonas. Aurora. She was 8 months pregnant when she was forced to leave her Denver homeless shelter. It was November. Ivani Herrera took her 4-year-old son Dylan by the hand and led him into the chilly night, dragging a suitcase containing donated clothes and blankets she had taken from the Microtel Inn and Suites. It was one of 10 hotels where Denver has housed more than 30,000 migrants, many of them Venezuelan, over the last 2 years. First, they walked to Walmart. There, with money she and her husband had collected from begging on the street, they bought a tent. They waited until dark to construct their new home. They chose a grassy median along a busy thoroughfare in Aurora, the next town over, a suburb known for its immigrant population. We wanted to go somewhere where there were people, Herrera, 28, said in Spanish. It feels safer. That night, temperatures dipped to 32 degrees, and as she wrapped her body around her son's to keep him warm enough that he could sleep, Ivani Herrera cried. Seeking better lives, finding something else. Over the past 2 years, a record number of families from Venezuela have come to the United States, seeking a better life for themselves and their children. Instead, they've found themselves in communities roiling with conflict about how much to help the newcomers, or whether to help at all. Unable to legally work without filing expensive and complicated paperwork, some are homeless and gambling on the kindness of strangers to survive. Some have found themselves sleeping on the streets, even those who are pregnant. Like many in her generation, regardless of nationality, Herrera found inspiration for her life's ambitions on social media. Back in Ecuador, where she had fled years earlier to escape the economic collapse in her native Venezuela, Herrera and her husband were emboldened by images of families like theirs hiking across the infamous Darien Gap from Colombia into Panama. If all those people could do it, they thought, so can we. They didn't know many people who had moved to the United States, but pictures and videos of Venezuelans on Facebook and TikTok showed young, smiling families in nice clothes standing in front of new cars, boasting of beautiful new lives. U.S. Border Patrol reports show Herrera and the people who inspired her were part of an unprecedented mass migration of Venezuelans to America. Some 320,000 Venezuelans have tried to cross the southern border since October 2022, more than in the previous 9 years combined. Just weeks after arriving in Denver, Herrera began to wonder if the success she had seen was real. She and her friends had developed another theory. The hype around the U.S. was part of some red de engaño, or network of deception. After several days of camping on the street and relieving herself outside, Herrera began to itch uncontrollably with an infection. She worried. Would it imperil her baby? She was seeing doctors and social workers at a Denver hospital where she planned to give birth because they served everyone, even those without insurance. They were alarmed that their pregnant patient was now sleeping outside in the cold. Days after she was forced to leave the microtel, Denver paused its policy and allowed homeless immigrants to stay in its shelters through the winter. Denver officials say they visited encampments to urge homeless migrants to come back inside, but they didn't venture outside the city limits to Aurora. As Colorado's third largest city, Aurora, on Denver's eastern edge, is a place where officials have turned down requests to help migrants. In February, the Aurora City Council passed a resolution telling other cities and nonprofits not to bring migrants into the community because it, quote, does not currently have the financial capacity to fund new services related to this crisis, close quote. Yet, still they come because of its lower cost of living and Spanish-speaking community. In fact, former President Donald Trump last week called attention to the city, suggesting a Venezuelan gang had taken over an apartment complex. Authorities say that hasn't happened. The doctors treated Herrera's yeast infection and urged her to sleep at the hospital. It wouldn't cost anything, they assured her, just as her birth would be covered by emergency Medicaid, a program that extends the health care benefits for poor American families to unauthorized immigrants for labor and delivery. Herrera refused. How, quote, she asked, could I sleep in a warm place when my son is cold on the street, close quote. Another family cast out into the night. It was March when David Jaimez, his pregnant wife, and their 2 daughters were evicted from their Aurora apartment. Desperate for help, they dragged their possessions into a Thursday evening Bible study at Jesus on Colfax, a church and food pantry inside an old motel. Its namesake and location, Colfax Avenue, has long been a destination for the drug-addicted, homeless veterans, and new immigrants. When the Jaimez family arrived, the prayers paused. The manager addressed the family in elementary Spanish, supplementing with Google Translate on her phone. After arriving from Venezuela in August and staying in a Denver-sponsored hotel room, they'd moved into an apartment in Aurora. Housing is cheaper in that eastern suburb, but they never found enough work to pay their rent. Quote, I owe $8,000, Jaimez said, his eyes wide. Supposedly there's work here. I don't believe it, close quote. Jaimez and his wife are eligible to apply for asylum or for, quote, temporary protected status, close quote, and with that, work permits. But doing so would require an attorney or advisor, months of waiting, and $500 in fees. At the prayer group, Jaime's daughters drank sodas and ate tangerines from one participant, a middle-aged woman and Aurora native. She stroked the ponytail of the family's 8-year-old daughter as the young girl smiled. When the leader couldn't find anywhere for the family to stay, they headed out into the evening, pushing their year-old daughter in her stroller and lugging a suitcase behind them. After they left, the middle-aged woman leaned forward in her folding chair and said, quote, "It's kind of crazy that our city lets them in but does not help our veterans," close quote. Nearby, a man nodded in agreement. That night, Jaimes and his family found an encampment for migrants run by the Denver Prophet called All Souls and moved into tent number 28. Volunteers and staff brought in water, meals, and other resources. Weeks later, the family was on the move again. Camping without a permit is illegal in Denver, and the city closed down the encampment. All Souls reestablished it in 6 different locations, but it closed permanently in May. At its peak, nearly 100 people were living in the encampment. About half had been evicted from apartments, hastily arranged before their shelter time expired, said founder Candace Marley. 22 residents were children and 5 women were pregnant, including Jaime's wife. Marley is trying to get a permit for another encampment, but the permit would only allow people over 18. Quote, "Even though there are a lot of kids living on the street, they don't want them all together in a camp," Marley said. "That's not a good public image for them," close quote. A city's efforts, not enough. Denver officials say they won't tolerate children sleeping on the street. Quote, "Did you really walk from Venezuela to be homeless in the U.S.? I don't think so," close quote, said John Ewing, spokesman for Denver's Health and Human Services Department. "We can do better than that." Still, Denver struggled to keep up with the rush of migrants, many arriving on buses chartered by Texas to draw attention to the impact of immigration. All told, Denver officials say they have helped some 42,700 migrants since last year, either by giving them shelter or a bus fare to another city. Initially, the city offered migrants with families 6 weeks in a hotel. But in May, on pace to spend $180 million this year helping newcomers, the city scaled back its offer to future migrants while deepening its investment in people already getting help. Denver paid for longer shelter stays for 800 migrants already in hotels and offered them English classes and help applying for asylum and work permits. But any migrants arriving since May have received only 3 days in a hotel. After that, some have found transportation to other cities, scrounged for a place to sleep, or wandered into nearby towns like Aurora. Today, fewer migrants are coming to the Denver area, but Marley still receives dozens of outreaches per week from social service agencies looking to help homeless migrants. Quote, "It's so frustrating that we can't help them," she said. "That leaves families camping on their own, unsupported, living in their cars. Kids can't get into school. There's no stability," close quote. After the encampment closed, Jaimes and his family moved into a hotel. He paid by holding a cardboard sign at an intersection and begging for money. Their daughter only attended school for 1 month last year, since they never felt confident that they were settled anywhere more than a few weeks. The family recently moved to a farm outside of the Denver area, where they've been told they can live in exchange for working. On the front lines of begging. When Herrera started feeling labor pains in early December, she was sitting on the grass, resting after a long day, asking strangers for money. She waited until she couldn't bear the pain anymore and could feel the baby getting close. She called an ambulance. The paramedics didn't speak Spanish but called an interpreter. They told Herrera they had to take her to the closest hospital instead of the one in Denver, since her contractions were so close together. Her son was born healthy at 7 pounds, 8 ounces. She brought him to the tent the next day. A few days later, the whole family, including the baby, had contracted chickenpox. Quote, "The baby was in a bad state," said Emily Rodriguez, a close friend living with her family in a tent next to Herrera's. Herrera took him to the hospital, then returned to the tent before being offered a way out. An Aurora woman originally from Mexico invited the family to live with her, at first for free. After a couple weeks, the family moved to a small room in the garage for $800 a month. To earn rent and pay expenses, Herrera and Rodriguez have cleaned homes, painted houses, and shoveled snow, while their children waited in a car by themselves. Finding regular work and actually getting paid for it has been difficult. While their husbands can get semi-regular work in construction, the women's most consistent income comes from something else, standing outside with their children and begging. Herrera and her husband recently became eligible to apply for work permits and legal residency for Venezuelans who arrived in the United States last year. But it will cost $800 each for a lawyer to file the paperwork, along with hundreds of dollars in government fees. They don't have the money. One spring weekday, Herrera and Rodriguez stand by the shopping carts at the entrance to a Mexican grocery store. While their sons crawl along a chain of red shopping carts stacked together, and baby Milan sleeps in his stroller, they try to make eye contact with shoppers. Some ignore them. Others stuff bills in their hands. On a good day, each earns about $50. It comes easier for Rodriguez, who's naturally boisterous. Quote, "One day a man came up and gave me this iPhone. It's new," close quote, she says, waving the device in the air. Quote, "Check out this body," she says as she spins around, laughing and showing off her ample bottom. "I think he likes me," close quote. Herrera grimaces. She won't flirt like her friend does. She picks up Milan and notices his diaper is soaked, then returns him to the stroller. She has run out of diapers. Milan was sick, but Herrera has been afraid to take him to the doctor. Despite what the hospital had said when she was pregnant, she was never signed up for emergency Medicaid. She says she owes $18,000 for the ambulance ride and delivery of her baby. Now she avoids going to the doctor or taking her children because she's afraid her large debt will jeopardize her chances of staying in the U.S. Quote, "I'm afraid they're going to deport me," she says. But some days when she's feeling overwhelmed, she wants to be deported, as long as she can take her children along. Like the day in May when the security guard at the Mexican grocery store chased off the women and told them they couldn't beg there anymore. Quote, "He insulted us and called us awful names," Rodriguez says. The two women now hold cardboard signs along a busy street in Denver and then knock on the doors of private homes, never returning to the same address. They type up their request for clothes, food, or money on their phones and translate it to English using Google. They hand their phones to whoever answers the door. The American dream still out of reach. In the garage where Herrera and her family live, the walls are lined with stuffed animals people have given her and her son. Baby Milan, on the floor, pushes himself up to look around. Dylan sleeps in bed. Herrera recently sent $500 to her sister to make the months-long trip from Venezuela to Aurora with Herrera's 8-year-old daughter. Quote, "I'll have my family back together," she says, close quote. And she believes her sister will be able to watch her kids so Herrera can look for work. Quote, "I don't feel equipped to handle all of this on my own," she says. The problem is, Herrera hasn't told her family back in Venezuela how she spends her time. Quote, "They think I'm fixing up homes and selling chocolate and flowers," she says. "I'm living a lie," close quote. When her daughter calls in the middle of the day, she's sure not to answer and only picks up after 6 p.m. Quote, "They think I'm doing so well, they expect me to send money," she says. And Herrera has complied, sending $100 a week to help her sister pay rent and buy food for her daughter. Finally, her sister and daughter are waiting across the border in Mexico. When we come to the U.S., her sister asks, could we fly to Denver? The tickets are $600. She has to come clean. She doesn't have the money. She lives day to day. The American dream hasn't happened for Ivani Herrera, at least not yet. Life is far more difficult than she has let on. She texts back, no. Did Muhammad Ali fight in Colorado? The Colorado Sun partners with GigaFact to investigate viral claims. By Justin George. Yes. On July 14th, 1979, Denver Broncos defensive end Lyle Alzado fought Muhammad Ali in an exhibition match at the original Mile High Stadium. Alzado, one of the NFL's most boisterous characters, had been an accomplished amateur boxer and had always wanted to box his hero. Ali, widely known as the greatest of all time, was on the downside of his career and would briefly retire just 2 months later. When Ali entered the ring, the half-filled stadium shouted, "Ali! Ali! Ali!" And when Alzado, two-time All-Pro player, entered, the crowd of about 20,000 yelled, "Defense!" according to the New York Times, which covered the event. Ali, coming off his last title bout against Leon Spinks, weighed 234 pounds to Alzado's 243 pounds. The match was taped for NBC's Sunday Sports World, with Ali being guaranteed $250,000 to participate. The match went 8 rounds, but was not scored. Thank you for joining us for The Colorado Sun, September 10th, 2024, read by Tom McMillan.
If you enjoyed this program, please register for our free services at www.aftersight.org or by calling 303-786-7777.